Hello and welcome back to the studio. Today we're going to go through the process of a painting that I just finished that's right behind me. So you'll see that we start out a little sketch to kind of finalize what I was going to do. Started painting and everything changed. So we're going to talk about how to embrace those changes, what we learned from making mistakes when we're making art, and just, that kind of thing. Here we go. If you happen to see my last video, you know that I'm in the middle of a magnolia painting series. I just got back from a trip home to Louisiana to visit family, and while I was there, I had to take advantage of all the magnolias in bloom. So one morning, my daughter and I went out on a walk in search of the perfect reference photos, and we found so many. It was one of those slow, sweet mornings that made me grateful for how much inspiration nature offers when you actually pause to look at it. This new painting is the second in the series, and it's a really detailed one. I'm working in acrylic on wood panel, but at the end I'll also go in with pencil and some soft pastel for some soft texture. But to start, I sketched out the general shape of the tree, blocked in where I wanted the magnolias just to make sure everything would fit, and then began adding in the leaves, one by one. That piece-by-piece approach isn't unusual for me. It's how I normally work, but I definitely underestimated how many leaves I would be painting for this piece. On the first day, I felt great, tons of progress, but then came days 2, 3, 4, and I still had over half the panel to fill. That's when I started second-guessing my strategy. Not in a panic, but in a reflective kind of way. I didn't let those thoughts derail the painting, but it's definitely something that stayed in the back of my mind. And as we go forward with this, I really want you to think about when you're painting how there are so many decisions you have to make, and it's really important to know when something is in the messy middle or when it just takes patience and when it needs to be painted over. Because it's a really big difference, and it's a skill that I think comes with time and a lot of painting. Second guessing yourself in the middle of a painting can feel so frustrating. You hit a point where your vision doesn't match what's showing up on the panel, and it can be tempting to push forward just to get it done. But over the years, I've learned that these moments are when I really need to slow down. Because here's the thing. I've grown into this place where I know which thoughts I need to listen to, and I know when I'm just in the inevitable messy middle. I also know when something genuinely isn't working and it's time to pivot. That kind of clarity doesn't show up overnight whatsoever, and it's taken a lot of trial and error and a lot of paintings that just didn't go where I thought they would. But now I'm starting to learn to trust myself, and trust makes all the difference. Because instead of panicking, I feel grounded and I know how to move forward even when things feel really murky. You're about to see me repaint this background several times, and this is one of the times where I felt sure that things needed to change. It wasn't something that was going to be resolved as the painting went forward. I mean, this background is pretty simple, so this is kind of a simple example of it. but it does take up a lot of the painting and it makes a really big impact. So I ended up painting it at least 5 times before I landed on something that felt right. I started off trying this beautiful light blue. I was inspired by the vibrant blue in the last painting and thought that it might work here as well. And at first I really liked it. But as I began to fill in the larger pieces, it felt like the blue was overpowering the leaves. All the subtleties were disappearing, and I immediately knew it's because I had introduced ultramarine blue, which I hadn't used anywhere else in the painting, wasn't even a part of my original palette. It didn't look bad at all. Honestly, looking back at the footage now, it looks pretty nice, but I had this gut feeling that I could do better, create something more cohesive and in harmony with the rest of the palette. So next, I mixed up a butter yellow. It's kind of my color crush at the moment. It's what I had originally planned in my rough sketch, and it fit beautifully within the limited palette that I'd been using. And I thought it would be a nice way to just change up the typical blue background, but it still felt off. When I stepped back, the color blended too much into my studio wall. Not that everyone has white walls, I know, but in that moment, it was enough to convince me that I needed to change. Plus, I didn't think the magnolias stood out enough against it. It just didn't have the contrast or presence that I was looking for. Finally, I mixed up a green-blue shade using the colors that were in my palette, and everything started to feel right. It felt rich and moody and let the browns and oranges in the leaves come forward in this really beautiful way. And I clearly love green, so maybe that's why it felt so successful. But more than that, it created a mood for the painting that just felt right. And here's what really stands out to me now. There was a time when I never would have repainted something 5 times. I would have called it done long before this version. The other ones looked great. They were fine. But I think that I've grown and I've learned to trust my instincts to follow those little nudges. I don't hesitate anymore when I know I can make something better. Because if I need to go back, I can. And more often than not, following those curiosities is what keeps me inspired and evolving as an artist. Every painting I've ever made has looked somewhere between bad and horrible at some point in the middle, every single one. But the difference now is that I don't panic anymore. I don't take that as a sign that the painting is failing. I take it as a sign that it just needs more refinement. The messy middle is such a part of the creative process, and I think it's really the reason so many people think that they can't paint or they can't draw. It's because they don't know that they just need to take it further. Maybe they don't know how, but the messy middle is such a trap, even for the most seasoned creatives. So we just need to learn to recognize it and figure out what the next step is. Honestly, it's where so much growth happens. Some of my favorite paintings started out feeling like absolute disasters. The struggles made the final pieces feel even more meaningful. And it pushed me to problem solve and slow down and keep going even when I wasn't sure how something's going to turn out. You really have to trust the creative process. The paintings that challenge me the most often become the ones I feel the closest to because I know what it took to get there. I know the decisions that I made, the risks I took, and the pivots that brought out something really beautiful and unexpected. It's like the story lives in all those layers of paint, and that story is just as important as the final image. Even when it's not super obvious, it still comes through. There's always a little hint of it somewhere. If you're in the messy middle, you're probably thinking of all the solutions that could fix what you're looking at. But the real question is it necessary? Will the problem be solved with just a little more time, or do you actually need to pivot? If it's something that can be salvaged, I like to tuck away those solutions for another day and use them as starting points for another composition. For example, with all the leaves in this painting, I kept thinking about whether or not it would have been easier if I started with a solid mass of color for all of the foliage, and instead of painting each leaf, what if I had carved out the negative space? Would it have saved time? Would it have looked looser, better, worse? I honestly have no idea what the final result would have been, but that curiosity is enough to keep me going and potentially inspire a new piece and a new process. So if you're an artist listening to this, whether you're painting, drawing, sculpting, I want you to remember that you're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to start over. You're allowed to experiment while the painting is still in progress. Second guessing isn't failure, it's curiosity. When we trust ourselves to lean into that rather than resist it, we can end up creating something deeper. And if you're in the middle of a piece that feels messy or uncertain, just hang in there. You might be closer to something way more beautiful than you even think. Just trust in all the time that you've spent creating that you know when you need to push forward and when you need to pivot. I hope you enjoyed watching this painting come together. Thank you so much for joining me in the studio today. If you're interested in this painting or the print, they're both available on my website right now, which is linked in the description. And if you want to know about the supplies I use, those are also linked in the description. So thanks for hanging out today. If you enjoyed, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.